It was very difficult. We ate a lot of peanut butter and jelly sandwiches in those early years because it was like trying to sell a rainbow. And he said, Sharon, if you see a problem and it's not a solution out there, I suggest you find some really bright people, work with you, and invent something better.
Hey, everybody, welcome back to the How Did It Happen podcast. I'm so happy that you're here with me today, as I am with every episode. And today, I'm fulfilling my promise to you with another amazing success story. I've got Sharon Sloane on the podcast. Sharon, welcome. Thanks for coming on.
My pleasure. Delighted to be here.
So let me tell you a little bit about Sharon to get you juiced up. Sharon Sloane is the president and CEO of WILL, W-I-L-L, Interactive. She has 30 years of experience designing leading-edge instructional systems for behavior modification and performance improvement. She holds a U.S. patent for creating computer-based interactive movie software to help improve human performance. I love that, human performance. Her work has been featured on NBC, CNN, NPR, as well as in Forbes magazine, Time magazine, The Washington Post, Washington Times, and in more than 50 other newspapers. She's received over 80 awards for her work, including the Woman of Vision Award given by the Women in Film and Video, New York Festival's World Medals, a Platinum dotcom Award, and Software Information Industry Association's Codie Award. Sharon has worked with many of America's most prestigious organizations and touched some 30 million users. Her company partners with companies like AIG, Yale New Haven Health System, U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, all branches of the U.S. military, the NFL, the FBI, law enforcement agencies in the U.S., U.K., Canada, Australia, Japan, and Israel, as well as a host of others across the globe. She's a keynote speaker at multiple conferences, including Revolutionary Learning, the American Medical Association's annual meeting, National Reconnaissance Office's annual conference on visual media, and a ton more. Sharon, it's such a pleasure to have you here. I start every show with the same question, and that is, how did it happen for you?
Well, thank you again for having me. It's delightful to be here. So how did it happen for me? Well, this really started back in the 1990s. My background is in education, training, and mental health. And I was looking at the landscape at that time of what was passing for training from corporations, hospitals, nonprofits, universities, and so forth. And it just seemed like all of the training provided knowledge, information, and skills, but did very little to actually influence behavior, change what people did in real life. And that is really the holy grail of learning. It's the application of what you know. And so we set out to answer the question, what does it take to engage people emotionally as well as intellectually at a level that truly influences what they do? And we did a lot of research, and we came up with this idea that if we could combine the neuroscience of learning, how people actually make decisions in real life, with the power of story, which is what we all remember and is sticky, the appeal of movies or video, and the interactivity of games, we might have a shot at doing something impactful. And that was the beginning of the work. And that's what led to the patent in the late 1990s. And then the uphill battle began.
And then the uphill battle began. It wasn't just smooth sailing from having the idea, huh? Amazing.
Well, in those days, it was crazy because it's hard to believe today, Mike, but people were saying things like, well, no one will ever play video on a computer. What are you people thinking? And so when we tried to show the work There was no bandwidth. There was no software to support this. We were having to do everything ourselves. And when we wanted to do a demonstration, my partners and I actually carried, one of them carried a desktop monitor, one a desktop computer, and I opened and closed the doors in order to take this into an office to show people these interactive movies that we had created. The good news is that there were some very visionary people back then, including a former chief of staff of the United States Army, some healthcare executives, and others that really wanted to move the needle, and they embraced it. And they gave us that footing that we needed. And now, over 25 years later, we're doing this all on our phones.
Okay, so let's explore a couple of things first. What were you doing first? Where you were exposed to this poor training and sort of the idea started germinating inside of you, because this wasn't the path you had chosen, right? You hadn't been like, oh, here's what I want to do, revolutionize or transform training.
No way. As a matter of fact, if anyone had ever told me back then I would be the CEO of a software company, I would have started laughing, because I'm not the technology person, and I'm still not, but I have brilliant people around me.
Sure.
But what happened was that I was doing a lot of curriculum development, instructional design, stand-up training, a lot of the traditional kinds of things that people did. And I just kept feeling like something was missing, because the translation of that into the organization really wasn't making much of an impact. And I was raised in a very entrepreneurial family. My dad was brilliant. He held several patents. He lost his own mother when he was 8 years old, grew up in a very poor environment, and really just was a self-made man in every sense of the word, and an amazing father and a brilliant entrepreneur. And I was talking with him, and he said, Sharon, if you see a problem and it's not a solution out there, I suggest you find some really bright people, work with you, and invent something better. And so the combination of the void that I saw and that support from my family, and then I was fortunate enough to meet through a mentor of mine, Will's co-founder, Lynn McCall, and he and I started the company together.
Okay, and so I want to dive a little bit into your dad, a little bit further into your dad. But before I do that, the you had chosen a path to become. Do I have this right? You had chosen a path to become a counselor. I know you got your master's in. I think you got your master's in counseling, and you had an undergrad degree in English and education, I think, right? So where was your head at when you were coming sort of out of high school, maybe, or maybe even as you came out of college as well?
I thought I would be a teacher.
Okay.
I figured I would be an English teacher and then a high school guidance counselor, both of which I did for a while. But I early on realized that although I certainly love kids, and I have 2 of my own and now 2 grandchildren, all of whom I adore, it wasn't for me to work with children, that I really wanted to work with adults. And that's what took me into adult education and training. Oh. So that is kind of how it morphed and went out of the classroom into more of the business world.
Okay. And so thank you for that. And let me go back to your dad. I'm an entrepreneur myself, but I wasn't raised in an entrepreneurial family. So I'm always interested in people who were, because I want to understand what it was like for you to see and talk about, and maybe even on some levels experience what your dad was into, and how that sort of, either did or did not leave an indelible kind of mark on you, because your career path initially was certainly one that wasn't what most people would call, the road to becoming an entrepreneur. And then but you had this this revelation about training along the way. And a lot of people have that and they don't do anything about it. It's like an idea is worthless, right? Unless you actually do something with it. So I'm just curious to understand, and for my listeners to understand what it was like to grow up in the with your dad being the influence that he was.
Well, it had an enormous impact on my life, as did my mother. I was blessed with two amazing parents. She was the kindest, sweetest, most incredible woman I had still ever known, and extremely supportive of what my father was trying to do, which was really create business from scratch. Now, he was in the manufacturing industry and the garment industry specifically, and was always inventing machines that would make things go faster or work more smoothly. But the thing that I remember most about the entrepreneurial environment was that after dinner, my father would figure margins on the back of a napkin. Now, in those days, it was literally on the back of a napkin because this was a long time ago. And how much fabric do we need? How many zippers do we need to buy, or buttons? How long will it take the folks to sew these garments together? And I thought that's what everybody did after dinner. They figured margins on the back of a napkin.
Yeah, why not?
So as I sat there as a young child, that was the conversation. Now, of course, as I got a little bit older, I realized that parents are very different. Families have very different conversations. But I think I always knew that I wanted to build something unique, that I wanted to create something. The other thing my father would often say to us, to my brother and I, was take the path that's best for you, but try to be the person that signs the check, not waits for the paycheck.
Mm.
And this was interesting because they struggled for many years, my parents, to build the business. He became incredibly successful at multiple factories, but it was a lot of hard work. It was a lifestyle, but there was so much love and humor in our house that I never felt like there was a struggle. I just felt like there was warmth and support, even though there were certainly challenges to overcome.
Okay, and so far you've shared two, really good nuggets from your dad. That one, try to be the person who signs the checks, not the person who waits for the paycheck. Um, y- Great advice, right? Because that's destiny, right? If you sign the checks, you control your destiny. Now that's a dangerous path. Can be a dangerous path too, because sometimes it's easier to sit back and wait for the check, at least for a period of time. But when you're out driving to make a business successful, and you're the person who's writing the checks, there's a lot of meaning and a lot of satisfaction to that, along with the danger. So that was one thing. But then the other thing you mentioned, when he said, if you don't like what you're seeing, find some brilliant people and change it, or something like that. I mean, that's like, I don't know, that's like super. I mean, it really holds your feet to the fire, right? It's like Sharon's got an idea, and yeah, you can have a great idea, or you can complain about it, or you can do whatever, but not, you can easily not take action on it. And he was basically saying, hey, um, you got a great idea, Sharon. You got a good head on your shoulders. You know people who can help you, or you can find them. If this is really what you want to do, go do it, right? Yeah. I was so yeah, your father is very wise. Is he still with us, your father? Okay. That's too bad. So let me talk about training now. You saw this void about training being something that wasn't changing behavior, which I love how you connect that, because even today, I think all of us listening have had training at, let's say, at work. We've all had training at work, and um, I would say that the majority of it you wouldn't walk away from and say that was amazing training. I am so inspired to activate change in my life based on what I just learned, which is what you were saying it was back when you had this idea for, video, movies, and software. And have you seen, besides what you are doing, and I want to get into that pretty deeply because it's so cool, but have you seen much of a change outside of that in the way that training is developed, um, provided, implemented, that kind of thing, um, during your career, or is 2021 a lot like 1991?
Certainly there have been changes. The whole e-learning industry, as it's called, grew up. There are a lot of courses and training programs delivered online now that, that was not the case back then. The thing that hasn't changed nearly enough is the fundamental underneath that of, is the training going to engage people in a way that will make an impact? As you just pointed out, most people hear the word training and they conjure up this boring experience that somebody requires them to take. Maybe it's even dreadful, or how can they click through it if it's online and do something else meaningful while they're clicking through the training or the
Yes.
PowerPoint or the talking head. And that's not learning. That's a poor investment. And there are millions and millions of dollars being spent on things that still do not have an impact. So we here at Will are on a mission to what we call rid the world of stab me with a fork training. And I say that because that's how people feel about it. I was on a Zoom a few weeks ago with a chief medical officer of a hospital system. We were talking about clinician burnout, well-being, and training. And she actually did that. She said, we sure don't need any more of that stab me with a fork training. I'm excited to see, that you're doing something very different. And so the question that I always ask of the people that make the decisions around this is, if you were asked to take this training, would you value it? Would you see it as a good use of your time? Because I think we need to respect the learner. And I think a lot of the training out there is actually a waste of time and very disrespectful. And what I'm feeling and seeing now more than ever is in regard to culture. Technical training, there are things that people simply must know how to do, procedures to follow, and skill-based training that is necessary to do the job, technical work. That's one thing. But just look at this world we're in now. Every day there's something else around sexual harassment, abusive conduct, racial issues, gender, sexual orientation, mental
Yeah.
health. I mean, these are not silos. When somebody shows up to school or to work, they bring their whole self. So it's not about getting the report done if you're dealing with all of these other issues. And I think that's where things are severely lacking, and that we're working hard, as are others, to take that on and really change the environment, change the culture, make things okay that should be okay, and make things not okay that shouldn't be okay. But it has to come from inside. You can mandate certain things, but I guess what we want to do is change people's default, change their muscle memory to make different decisions.
And do you think that people are self-aware enough in general that they want to change their behaviors, Sharon, when they're getting training, or does that kind of, so what comes to mind is sort of the person that everybody knows is a jerk. Let's say everybody knows this person is a jerk. The only person who doesn't know this person is a jerk is the jerk. And so you do jerk training, And everyone's like, oh, this is for the jerk. And the jerk's sitting there doing the training, and he or she is like, I don't know why I'm in this class. I don't need this training. Do you, so how, how do how do you think about, or how have you really experienced that kind of thing where people just don't think the training, they don't think they're the reason or one of the reasons that the training is necessary?
You're absolutely on point. In the beginning, before all of this, I used to do stand-up training. And in a case like you just described, an instructor would get up there and talk maybe about sexual harassment. And everybody in the room would kind of look over at Joe or Mary or whoever it was. And that person would be just, do, 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 do.
Yeah, clueless.
So what I think happens now is that some people are self-aware, but many are not. And what you can't do is put something out there that causes their defenses to go so high that the brain shuts down and there's no way to even open up dialogue. What we have found is critical, and we do this in our interactive movies, are two things. One, to view the same events through the eyes of different people, what we call multiple perspectives. And if it's something that's authentic, and all of our movies are based on actual events and real stories. So you're watching something, it looks like your environment, the people sound like the people you work with, but it's not you. So it's real enough to resonate, but not so in your face that it can't be, well, the character, she should do this or he should do that. And then I feel things the way you're perceiving them, and you feel them the way I'm perceiving them, because I get a chance to make the different choices in the interactive movie. The flip side of that is the opportunity to see ourselves as others see us. And I think that goes directly to the point that you just made. Those are aha moments.
Mm-hmm.
And when people realize that even though it's a fictional character, like, oh, that's what I do. Is that really how people see me? No wonder I'm not getting X, fill in the blank, the promotion, invited to this committee, whatever it might be. And then there's a self-awareness that takes place. That's the first step. But you can't beat people over the head, because you actually are counterproductive. And I think, unfortunately, a lot of what we see is really hokey, and people just roll their eyes and they say, well, okay, I guess I get the point, but nobody would ever say that. Nobody does that. Well, let's just finish this training and get on to the meeting.
Okay. So in other words, you're saying that a lot of times it's the behaviors that are in some of the training are so over the top that you couldn't miss that, and everyone's like, no one, yeah, that's a movie there. Then no, like a fictional movie. No one's really like that, but most of the things that are happening that people don't see are clear to some, but they're still subtle enough where the people who are doing it maybe can miss it. Am I on the right track?
Yes, yes, because the most important thing is to have dialogue. And one of the things that we value the most in hearing back from, our clients and our partners is, after they've used the interactive movie training, whether it's in a facilitated setting or online individually, they start talking about it with each other. You know what happened? Well, actually, that kind of thing kind of happened to my husband. And then people start talking about it. We call that a dose response in psychology. It's the reinforcement of the message, because now it's not the training educating you, it's you talking with your spouse, your friend, your boss, whoever it might be, about a shared experience. And you'd be surprised how people will open up and talk about things that they were uncomfortable talking about before.
Hmm. I love what you said about making sure that you keep the defenses low, because it seems to me in any kind of training, or whether it's training like some of the ones you mentioned, or just giving feedback to someone, as soon as you sort of breach that my defenses are turned on spot, and I know that's different for every person too, so it's not as easy as saying it, but once you breach that part, the likelihood of you making any further progress is probably pretty small, because the person's like, whoa, wait a second. And they're not hearing anything, they're not listening anymore. All they're doing is protecting themselves, right? So it seems like, yeah. I want to get, before I get more into what you do specifically, this e-learning thing that you mentioned got my attention, because I was thinking, and I've done a lot of e-learning, and we've done a lot of programs through e-learning. And as the business owner, I look and I say, oh my gosh, this is great, because now I don't have to take everybody off their shift or bring them in early, or or God forbid one person doesn't show up, so they miss the training, and now I have to do a makeup session, and I've brought this resource in, and they're very expensive, and I could just go on and on. And so it's like, okay, well, if I can deliver it through the computer, I've got all kinds of flexibility. And ultimately I convince myself, well, it's the same thing. And sometimes I think to myself, well, is it really the same thing? Or is it just a way for me to take a shortcut to check a box that satisfies the requirement, but as you said earlier, maybe doesn't help change behavior. Maybe it doesn't help the person that's actually taking the training. Maybe it doesn't help my company. But I can say, I've checked the box, and it was, and I did it in a way that didn't cost me any, downtime or stuff like that. Is that something that that's how I have thought about these things. And I just wanted to see if that's something you've encountered. What do you think about it, or how people deal with it, especially on the people who write the checks?
Mhm. Well, I think certainly stand-up training has its place. And again, it depends on what kind of training it is.
Sure.
But I think that online training is extremely effective if it's done really well. And if there is something around it, if there is discussion, if there are places embedded into the online training where you can raise a question or contact HR or whatever it might be, that it's part of the business operations. It's not tagged on. And the fact that it is asynchronous, that people can do it at any time 24/7, allows the flexibility for organizations who have people working globally in different time zones or in different shifts to take the training when they can best do it and it's best for the business. I certainly feel there is a place for stand-up training, but honestly, with the COVID and the pandemic, the bar has been raised so much higher on what is acceptable for online training now, and the younger generation, that people used to think, oh, the talking head, check the box, PowerPoint, click, click, click. That is not useful. That does not accomplish anything, except you can say you met the compliance requirement.
Right.
But if you want to do anything beyond that around your culture, that is really just not effective. So I think it's not so much the delivery modality, it's also being able to do it at scale. Because if you have a very large organization, people in different locations, then you need to have a standardized message. So if you bring in a trainer for this group today and next week someone else, they may not even be equal. Not anything wrong with either of those people or the business hiring them. And then where's the reinforcement? If it's online and you have access for a year or whatever it is, our partners use the program for reinforcement. If they get a new hire a few months later, we just add another license and somebody else can use the tool. So you have a lot more flexibility. And again, I would ask anyone making the decision, how would you feel about taking the training? If you feel it would be valuable, your own personal time, great. And if not, you might want to rethink your decision.
Oh, good point to throw it back, because the that's a great question to ask me. Like, so is this training good enough that you are not distracted? You're not doing other things when you think nobody's looking while you're getting the training. And if the answer to that is yes, then it's probably worth doing for the rest of the team. And if the answer is no, it's not working for you, why would you think it's going to work for the rest of the team? Right? So let's go back to the very beginning. You have this sort of breakthrough idea, and you surround yourself with some smart people, and that was funny. You hold the door for them as you bring the gear in. But how did you market yourself? How did you get out in front of people with this crazy idea? And what made them say yes initially? And then we'll get into why they've continued to say yes for such a long time.
It was very difficult. We ate a lot of peanut butter and jelly sandwiches in those early years because it was like trying to sell a rainbow. People just didn't understand where it fit in, what it was, why they would ever want to use it. And we basically kept knocking on doors. And one of our major breakthroughs came with the United States Army back in the late 1990s. They were facing kind of a public relations crisis around some inappropriate behavior by drill sergeants and young female recruits, sexual harassment, and a number of issues related to that. And my partner, Lynn, is a retired Marine Corps colonel and had an opportunity to bring this to the Marine Corps. And actually, the commandant of the Marine Corps at that time said, "This is really fascinating. It's not really for us, but let me make a phone call because I think the Army could use this." And we thought, okay, that was very kind and very gracious, but nothing was ever going to happen. And a few days later, we get a call from the Chief of Staff of the Army's office. And he really he's an amazing person. He's a visionary, still a visionary, an amazing individual. And he looked at what we had. And what's really funny now in this time is the only product we had to show back then, our first product, was on HIV/AIDS prevention for college students. So of all the topics to take into the Pentagon in the 1990s to demonstrate your technology, that was all we had.
And if you can sell them that, you can sell them anything, I guess. Right?
It was kind of like, well, you go with what you've got, right?
Yeah, sure.
And he immediately got it. And he said, okay, can you do this for equal opportunity, sexual harassment, personal courage, basically the Army values? And of course, we said yes. And this was a room of 4-star generals, very senior people, and with a broad arm sweep, said, let's do it. And that gave us a tremendous opportunity, not only with the Army, but it gave us a lot of credibility with others that we were working with the Army. And again, we had to buy computers at that time. It wasn't like it is today where you just click a few buttons and you're good to go. This was back in the day when it was CD-ROMs. Probably most computers don't even have CD-ROM drives now.
I don't think they do anymore. No.
But this was, whoa, like, we really going to do this? And he said, yeah, we're really going to do this. And we did. And that was the beginning of the trajectory. The other pivotal event, interestingly enough, unrelated to that, and it was tragic for all of us, was 9/11. And when 9/11 hit, we were contacted again by the Pentagon because they wanted to develop and deploy anti-terrorism training around the globe to all the services. And they had seen our work and they engaged us to really work around the clock for months. So what really happened, Mike, is that it took a long time. It was difficult, but we learned that if we could get to the leader, the person who's up at night about something, who really wants to make an impact about something, and get to that individual, access was the hardest thing. Mm-hmm. Then the rest was paperwork.
Okay, got it. So, yep, start at the top, get the person's attention, and then the rest of it handles itself, right? So, I would love to understand like how. So, I watched one of your films or one of your training productions that you were kind enough to share with me, and it was in a hospital setting. And what occurred to me as I was watching it was, oh, okay, so there's, and I didn't make the connection at first, but I'm making it now. There's, in that particular kind of setting, there are, I'll call it a class structure. There are people that are or think they are, here, and there's all different kinds of layers underneath that. And when I was thinking about that as you were talking, I thought to myself, oh, well, that's probably like how a lot of companies are. Actually, a lot of organizations are. So I'm curious what goes into making something that's powerful enough to effectively change behavior? Because I've heard you talk about, keeping the defenses down. I've heard you talk about, engaging. I've heard you talk about what was the last thing I was going to say? Well, it doesn't matter. I've heard you talk. Oh, psychology. Yeah. So I'm wondering, like, when you get in and you start writing a script, let's say for this, I don't know if that's where it starts, or writing a script or what, but I want to kind of get into, like, you're the producer, and this is what you do. How do you put it together in a way that makes it so different, special, impactful?
Well, first of all, I have an incredible team that actually does all of that. A chief creative officer who's been with us from the beginning, who's brilliant, and an amazing team under him. But we start with the question to the organization, as we did with Yale on the Thriving Clinician, which is the program that you looked at. What is the issue here? What are we trying to accomplish? What would be a gold star? At the end of the day, what do we want to make happen? And then we do extensive focus groups, we do interviews, we do research, so that everything is real and it's the actual issues that people are confronting. And then we create a document with that messaging, which of course goes back and forth and it gets iterated. Then we decide who the characters are in this fictional world. Doctor, nurse, whatever it might be in the different settings, at what stage in their career, about how old should this person be, what other demographics should we include, and then it's an interactive script. So it's the storyline, but where are all the choice points? And as you each come to those decisions, if you choose A, it takes you down a different path, B, C, D, and so forth. And it's the amalgam of all of those, because as in real life, it's not one decision usually that determines the outcome, unless it's a catastrophic one or a brilliant one. But usually it's a combination of decisions that you either go down a slippery slope and end up in a bad place, or you're making positive decisions that are improving your lives. And then a lot of things happen that are out of our control, and we build those into the movie too. Because some things just happen. Some decisions we make really don't matter. Should I have a chocolate donut or a jelly donut for lunch? I mean, I probably shouldn't have either one of them, but
yeah.
In any case, that's not a monumental decision. Right. So all of this gets built into the software. The software team is doing all the technology work. while the creative team is building the scripts. So all of the technology is working, all the algorithms are being produced. And then when people play the program, all of that gets recorded. So it's the combination of the choices that they make that lead people to different outcomes. And you can go back and see, okay, this didn't turn out very well. Most people don't want to be losers. They will go back and see where they messed up and what combination of choices would have taken them to a better place.
And does the information you capture on the experience of the individuals as they go through the training, does that lead to sort of a report or some next step thing? Like you see, oh, so a lot of people got tripped up on this, for example. So what do we do to address that? It seems like it's a issue that maybe needs more reinforcement or different policies and procedures or something like that.
Exactly. All of those analytics get collected and reported back to the organization for precisely that reason. So it's a learning tool, but it's also an assessment tool. And just as you said, oftentimes people will see, gee, everybody seems to be fine when it comes to this situation, but this situation is really problematic. Maybe we need another initiative, a different policy, more dialogue. And so, yes, that's all part of the solution that the software delivers.
Okay. And from the time, well, I don't even know if I want to go all the way back to the first first trainings you produced, but I'm curious how your business itself, whether through technology or whether through learning or whatever, has morphed and changed, in the 25 plus year period you've been doing this, because the core is still this sort of, very niche but deep, I don't know, blue ocean of sorts. But you've had to have, you've had to have evolved tremendously over time. So have you remained sort of, I don't know, you just tell me what's happened.
Well, you're right about a blue ocean. Some people put us in the e-learning category, and I guess we are to e-learning what the horseless carriage was to the horse and buggy. We're not a faster horse or a better buggy. We're an automobile.
Yeah.
And that's how different it is. But certainly the technology has evolved tremendously. And we've talked a little bit about that, from, CD-ROMs on a desktop computer that had to literally be carried around to now using it on your phone. But from the broader perspective, we tend to work on issues of national concern. And it's really interesting because we're a small company, little engine that could, people have called us that. If you look at your news feed or go back through the headlines of the newspapers, chances are that the issues that were on the headline, on the front page, above the fold, are the ones we're working on. And I think the reason that that has happened is because those issues are so crucial to so many people that the leadership of major organizations says we need to find something different than what we're doing. And what has happened is that whether it's the sexual harassment or it's mental health or the DE&I, diversity, equity, inclusion, those issues have gravitated toward us, and we've gravitated toward those issues because they are the most difficult to make an impact. Mm-hmm. And that's our core capability. In other words, if someone came to us and said, we want you to build an interactive movie on how to change a tire on this truck, that's really important because the tire has to work on the truck, or the truck could harm someone or not move. But that's not anything that we would do. We would suggest that, you might want to talk to so-and-so. But the human behavior piece and elevating culture, it has to be at three levels, in my opinion: the individual, the organization, and then society writ large. And we work in those three areas continually to make an impact. We're also very mission driven here, the team. Many of our people have been with us from the beginning. And it's a little bit of a cliche, but our, culture is to do well by doing good. We are a business, and of course, we have to make a profit. But there's a huge commitment on the team to the values of the fact that everything we do here has to help somebody or some organization make better decisions. And we've actually had a few people come to us over the years with messaging that we didn't feel was appropriate. And so we just declined those opportunities.
So in other words, a potential client came to you with something they wanted you to do, and it didn't, whatever it was, it didn't align with you, with how you feel about the work you want to do or the impact you want to make, that kind of thing. Okay. That's always tough to turn down stuff, right? And it's like,
Oh, yeah,
you
it
always
was,
want to, yeah.
because here's somebody, that wants to pay you fairly to do a piece of work, but the content and the purpose of it just didn't align with our mission here.
Okay. And what about you? Like what, so you've been doing this for a long time. How have you grown, yourself as a leader? How have you educated yourself to become something more than you were, yesterday or last month or last year? I'm curious what you've done as you've come along as the CEO or, co-founder or whatever you like to call yourself, or what other people like to call you. Maybe that's a better way to say it.
Well, first of all, when we started out, this would be really fascinating. I think this is really important and I hope it will work. And so validation over the years has helped me grow. But the main thing is nobody does anything major. No one achieves success alone. Success is always achieved through the people with whom you interact. I, of course, had my dad and my mother. I've had mentors along the way that have been extremely helpful to me, very influential partners and clients that have become friends. And just always trying to learn and grow. But I also try my best to be a servant leader because I see my job as helping everyone else excel. And we believe in what we call mission type orders here. So we, tell people what we think we need to do, and we ask them if they agree and how they think it should be done. But I learn every day from my staff. So we are very almost like a family in that regard. We care a lot about each other. COVID has tested that, and I'm truly blessed because everyone on our team leaned in, even when the going was really hard and we all had to work remotely and no one knew it was around the next corner. They are so adaptable and really just incredibly talented.
Mm-hmm.
So I just try to be the facilitator and also the conduit between what the market is asking for, and I think that is needed, and what my team says in terms of how we should go about addressing it.
And you've mentioned a few things so far that are sort of unique to the way you approach things, whether it was this declining this work because it didn't align with your values or this mission type orders. I've read a couple of other things that I thought were interesting and reflective of your culture, and I just wanted to run those by you and get your sense of what they are. The three things that I wrote down were platinum rule, which I hadn't heard platinum rule. I heard what it was, but I hadn't heard it called platinum rule. Beam holders, I thought that was really cool, and chair time. And could you just take us through those three things and tell us what those mean to you?
The platinum rule, I think, is so important. And that is top of mind for me all of the time. I often say to people, having a master's degree in counseling, I think, has served me better than an MBA, because it's all about the people. The platinum rule is do unto others as they would have you do unto them, which may or may not be as you would want people to treat you. Of course, the golden rule is always important. You never want to harm anyone, disrespect anyone. But just because something is a priority to you or the most valuable thing to you doesn't mean that that's where the other person sits. So if you can understand what is the most important thing or what is a priority for that individual, you want to deliver up what is most important to them. And that was something that my mother was gifted at. That's really where that came from. My mother actually suffered from physical eye problems for most of her adult life. But what she lacked in physical sight, she more than made up with this sixth sense of knowing what people needed and serving it up with authenticity. Mm-hmm. And so people loved her from all walks of life in many different ways. And I've always thought that was so amazing, because if you can read between the lines, oftentimes what people are saying is sort of the party line, but the platinum rule is really understanding what makes someone else tick, what's really important to them, which may not at all be what they're asking for.
I love the distinction that it's subtle but really meaningful between the golden rule and the platinum rule. It's just a few words different, right? And but the meaning is significantly different. Okay, cool. How about the other two?
The beam holder, that's all about people that feel that their growth and success aligns with the company's growth and success. And if the ceiling is falling down, they're going to put their arms up and try to hold it up. If there's a problem over here, it's not, well, that's that department. It's, okay, what are we going to do to help to fix this, to strengthen it or improve it? And the interesting part of that is that it's a two-way street. My door's always open. I want to know what people are thinking, how I can support them better, what we can do as from the leadership to help them grow. And at the same time, when I need something on a weekend, and it doesn't happen that often, but it has happened, there's never hesitation. Everybody is right there because they care, because it's their baby too. And so we really try to make Will their baby also. And the people that have stayed with us and that are most valuable to us will actually come and say, hey, the ceiling's falling down a little bit over here. It's not my department, but I have a thought. I'm going to go talk with so-and-so. They're proactive. So, that. And then the third one was
chair time.
The chair time. Well, that again came from my mom. I am a huge believer in the power of silence. We teach people communication, how to speak, how to listen, not nearly enough about how to listen. But I remember my mother was very active philanthropically and in the household and so forth. But usually late afternoon, early evening before my dad came home, she would sit down in the living room and she would always say, I'm not sleeping. So if you need anything, let me know. Often her eyes would be closed. I don't know to this day, of course, she's gone to, if she was meditating the way we talk about meditation today. Maybe it was something like that, but she would just say, I'm just reflecting on the day. And someone said this beautifully the other day, and I can't remember who it was, but they said, we are human beings, not human doers. We have to be as well as do. And I find that if I take that time to just let the day wash over me without judgment, not necessarily focusing on a specific problem, it's both rejuvenating And sometimes my best insights come from doing that.
Just a comfortable sort of clearing way for you to just take it all in, reflect upon it, whether it was good, bad, indifferent, um, and calm your, you know, maybe put it away. You know, reflect on it, put it away, go on with your life.
Yeah. And, rather than uh, relaxing by, watching television or reading or gardening or, all of these things are great. Um, I find that silence, quiet time, chair time is very replenishing and very, very important. I think it's just an important part of the day. Now, sometimes you get fewer minutes, sometimes you get more minutes to do that.
Right.
But I think it's important to just let things level set a little bit.
I really like that. I know I don't do enough chair time, but I do. One thing I am good at is silence. A lot of it kind of scares people sometimes, or they think, I don't know, they think if I'm silent, I'm, you know, not being social or something, and it's not that. I just like to think sometimes, or just maybe there's no thinking going on. It's just I don't know what, but I like it being. Yeah, right. Yeah, nice. So I read a New York Times article about you, and this was from several years ago. So maybe things have changed, but you said in that article that you've noticed, and I'm not quoting directly, but ethical misconduct and loss of integrity among people we do business with. Something you were basically saying. This was in the mid, it was 2015 or something like that. So a few years ago, but recent. You mentioned in there that it was different. Like you were noticing this and it was different. And I'm wondering how that made you feel and whether you're still seeing that and what its impact is on you and why you think it is.
Well, I know exactly what you're referring to. And at the time that I did that New York Times interview, we were going through a very difficult situation. Fortunately, it was the only situation like that up until that time and since that time. So clearly an outlier. But what had happened was that in order to work with a very large client, we had to work through what they called a prime contractor, this other company in between us and the client. And just to make a long story short, what was happening was a very significant project using our proprietary technology and interactive movie methodology. And there were a number of deliverables along the way, and we would be providing these, and we were not getting paid. And after this went on multiple times, and we were incurring significant expenses, and this company that was between us and the client kept saying, well, they weren't paid, therefore we couldn't pay you. And then they came up with all of these other excuses. Well, it turned out that in fact, they were always being paid. They were just taking the money.
Oh, no.
And when we got to seven figures, unfortunately, we had no alternative except to engage legal counsel. We have got it resolved. It was a very painful experience. And it was very, not only financially, it jarred me because everyone we had worked with up until that time and all the values that were instilled in me were so contrary to that type of behavior that I didn't want to believe that anything like that could be going on. I wanted to believe the excuses that were being given to us.
Right.
And what that experience left me with is being more self-aware of red flags, that if something really doesn't seem right repeatedly, check into it. And as I say, fortunately, we've never had another experience like that. But but it really jolted us to the core because it was so bizarre and so out of our experience and out of our values.
It is strange how you can have something bad like that happen to you in life or in business. And if you're not careful, it can change the way you think about humanity, right? Because you're so close to it. It's so raw and it's meaningful. I mean, 7 figures is a big deal. And yeah, you go through that and you think, who are these people? How can there be people like that out there? And it can really change you, at least temporarily, right? It sounds like it did temporarily, at least. Did that company wake up and come to you for some customized training on how to do business?
No, they had other problems to deal with.
Okay. I thought that might have been a good circular end to that story. Well, Sharon, this has been so much fun talking to you and getting to know you, and learning about your experiences and the wonderful work that you're doing at Will Interactive, and the amazing impact that your parents had on you, and how you just approach every day and your team. Yeah, it's really inspirational. I learned a lot, and I want to thank you for coming on. How do people connect with you if they'd like to? What's your favorite way for people to connect?
Email me. I'm at sharon@willinteractive.com. I'm also very active on LinkedIn. People can write to me there or through our website, willinteractive.com. There's a way you can get to me through the website as well. And we still answer our phones. Our phone number is on the website, and we answer them. And I'll be happy to talk with anyone that wants to talk with me.
Perfect. And LinkedIn is how I connected with Sharon, through a mutual introduction. I think it was Justin Breen or maybe Jeffrey Felberg. I can't remember, or maybe both. But anyway, thanks for sharing your email address and encouraging people to connect with you on LinkedIn. And I hope you have a wonderful day. Thanks for being on the show.
Thank you. It was an absolute pleasure, and I really enjoyed it. Appreciate it so much, Mike.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the How Did Happen podcast, where we believe that success doesn't happen unless you make it happen. You can subscribe to the podcast on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, or wherever you like to listen. And while you're there, please rate it and leave a comment as well. I'd love to hear your thoughts about the show, ideas for future guests, or whatever you'd like to share. And of course, you can always find me at mikemalatesta.com. See you next time. Thanks again for listening to the How Did Happen podcast.